Okay, so starting up, I looked at the business technical knowledge that IACBE has and said, how does that fit into all of this? I also, as I was looking at the NACE career competencies, was looking at the new IACBE key learning outcomes. And in looking at them, we cover in our key learning outcomes most of the competencies. There are a couple. Digital technology, like I said, to me that's partly in analytical tools, but we also have a self-study principle, number 4.6, that talks about technology skills and that agility with students and ability to use data and data analytics. And then with career management, we don't have anything in our key learning outcomes, but we do have a principle now that talks about career development and planning services. It doesn't really get at what employers are looking for, and I'm not sure, I guess I don't know where that goes in IACBE's role to accredit business programs and help business programs. It's definitely very, very important, but I don't know how it fits in what we do with all of you. So I guess that's one, getting feedback from people, thinking about it, to see if that's something that we should be requiring more of from you as part of the business accreditation or not. And I honestly, I have no idea. I have no opinion at this point. But employers want it. So it's important. They hire who they hire. So I looked at the model again and tried to think about where do the NACE competencies come in. And really a lot of them are down in those bottom 3 levels. That's where all of those pieces at least get started. And I agree with Jim that there's a thread. They don't stop there, but they're, I think, articulated more specifically down at the bottom, and then they're demonstrated and built and grown all the way up to the top piece. You know, it's just like we tell people all the time, you don't have to have a course on business ethics, but you have to cover ethics. So the ethics is listed down at the bottom maybe, and intertwined through a lot of other pieces. So in my visualization, and again, everybody needs to visualize this the way that makes sense for them, that's where I see the NACE competencies. Well, then where do the IACBE key learning outcomes come in? And I think they really try to connect everything, that whole package. Realizing that a lot of the pieces on the lower on the pyramid, down at the bottom where they're introduced, are not under our control, but we do hold you all accountable for measuring them. Whether you control everything the student gets, you still have to measure them at the end of the program as to whether they've achieved those. And we do that, I said it earlier, because your intended student learning outcomes have to substantially encompass the IACBE key learning outcomes. And substantially encompass, there's 8 of them. If you cover 7 of them, when I work with schools, I don't know which one you'd eliminate because I think all 8 are important. Usually when I work with the school, they cover all 8. But it's a choice, and you don't have to. So, comments? Does this help to frame this model kind of from an IACBE way of envisioning the world? Okay. So, why is any of it important or helpful? At least for me, it helps me to frame and articulate what I'm trying to accomplish with students, what I want them to look like and be able to do by the end of the program. But we do need to see what's important. So I've got some more NACE information about what employers look for. And this first one, and there's a whole long list. There's probably 20 items on this list. It's on their website. Technical knowledge in this list ranks about 10th or 12th, which it has in the past ranked low. But what's important? Whether the student has completed an internship with that particular organization. And this is a 5-point scale. So that was very important. But not that far behind, does the student just have internship experience within the industry? Maybe it's not at your CPA firm, but it's at some CPA firm. What their major is. And you notice that there it drops quite a bit in importance from the top two that are very close. The internship drops quite a bit to get down to what the major is. Has held leadership positions. You may not have to lead when you first get there, but have you done something to show that you can be a leader? General work experience. How many students, and probably not in a lot of your institutions, but in traditional schools, they never have worked. They graduate when they're 21 or 22 years old, and they have never held a job. Well, how does the employer know they're going to show up on time for work if they've never held a job? Very difficult. And then I just put the last one down because all of these except major speak to work experience of some type, something that could be used to demonstrate that the student has some kind of work experience. The idea I talked about in the beginning, resume-worthy experience. All of these except the major, which goes on the resume too, but all of those others are ways for students to gain resume-worthy experience. So 5 out of the top 6 all have to do with experience. The next one I thought was interesting, and NACE looks at this, is they look at what do employers look at on resumes? What kinds of skills are they looking for on that resume? Number 1 is written communication skill. It's been at the top for 3 or 4 years that I've been looking at this NACE data. Problem-solving skills, they're really, when you get down, down to analytical, they're pretty close together. And really, until you get down to leadership, there's not a huge gap. Then you have a bigger drop to detail-oriented. There's technical skills down towards the bottom of the list again. They separate out written and verbal communication skills, which I think is interesting. A lot of our programs don't. Most of our schools don't separate them as 2 outcomes. A lot of them have online programs where there's not a huge verbal component, and they just have an outcome that relates to professional communication skills. How they assess that may have all those different components, but we allow schools to define what professional communication is for them. But a lot of those can be demonstrated in the classroom, and they can be demonstrated in the workplace. So I think trying to figure out ways for students to do them, both in the classroom to practice, and then providing the job experiences for them to do it somehow out in the real world is what employers are really looking for. So where can these kinds of things be most effectively demonstrated? We talk a lot about experiential learning, and there is a specific definition for experiential learning. And these are components of what experiential learning is. It's a process, not an outcome, learning how to learn. talk about all learning is relearning. Unless you're a newborn baby, everything connects to something you've already learned. There's all, if you study learning theory, all the constructivist theory, and it's relearning and adding to your understanding. It really is a resolution of conflicts between different ways of looking at things. That's how we challenge students. Going back to Socrates or Plato, that's how they taught. You pose a question, you have opposite kinds of answers, and learning takes place as you reconcile those opposing views. A holistic process of adaptation to the world. It is holistic. Learning is not separated from context or who you are or the environment. Again, it talks again about synergistic transactions between the person and the environment. And really, learning is the process of creating knowledge for the person who's learning. I can't do it for you. I can't learn it for you. I have to provide the experiences, the environment, what you need, so that you can learn it for yourself. In my view, resume-worthy experiences are a type of experiential learning. But not all experiential learning is resume-worthy. Some of them are. And we need to create those kinds of experiences that students can use on a resume. Can, when they are asked a situational question during an interview, say, well, when I was the quarterback of the football team and I was the team leader and I had to do this, this is how I solved that problem. They've got to have those experiences, and they can be in the classroom, they can be in extracurricular activities, they can be in the workplace, but we need to provide some place for them to have those resume-worthy kind of experiences. I think that they need to be related to the student's field of study. That if you're going to put them on your resume and you're focusing on a particular job, they need to be relevant to that job. Not all experiential learning is relevant to the job that you're pursuing. And I'm a firm believer that resumes you should have a different resume for every job you apply for. Because, as you said, you can go out and look at what they're looking for. You need to match what you have to what they're looking for and not use the shotgun approach and just say this is the one that goes to everybody.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes,
Phyllis?
please.
So we're currently utilizing a platform called Portfolium, which is an e-portfolio product.
Mm-hmm.
So tomorrow, the director of marketing is going to do a presentation on how Portfolium can be used for IACBE purposes. But also, our MBA program utilizes that platform specifically, and they've identified certain key assignments that students can upload into their e-portfolio. But the question is, related to this, are those really resume-worthy artifacts? And I would think so, but I think that's something that we have to give a little bit more thought to as we utilize that tool more and more.
It's great they have examples. If you look back at teaching programs, at art programs, at performance programs, they've had portfolios for years. A teacher takes their portfolio with them when they go to their teaching interview, and they show, this is my teaching plan for the day, this is what I can do. Art majors, design majors take their portfolio. In business, historically, we don't do a lot of that. I think having those examples is great, but I think your question, do they go on the resume? Are they resume-worthy? And how can you make them resume-worthy? Is there some way that you can do something with them so that they stand out enough to go on a resume? Or are they support for the student to show, this is a marketing plan, this is a budget I developed. There are these places. So
Yeah, and a
That'll
lot
be
is driven
interesting.
obviously by the employer, right? Like you said, in certain, jobs, like you said, in marketing jobs, a portfolio, architecture,
A
a
lot of fields
portfolio
of
is
portfolio.
something that is a requirement, but for, entry level positions in organizations, it's usually just a resume, and how can you have that resume reflect all of your experiences,
Right.
when most of the guidance on how to write a CV or a resume is keep it short and sweet and just have keywords. So
Yes.
Thank you, Jorge. The only one that I that I've seen like a subset of experiential learning are like PMI certification, like project management certification, and cybersecurity certification. Those are aligned from the industry, and you can just put it on the resume of the MBA student or maybe a bachelor's. And that's something that you can translate to the employer. Hey, I got these ones from this school. The courses were taught at this school. I got certified by the industry. Then I'm going to put it on my resume, and then I'm worthy of work for you or something.
Well, depending on what the specific job and occupational goals are for the student, certifications like that, it is an experience. They are definitely resume worthy. And if you can help students to gather those kinds of things to put on their resume, it puts them ahead of the students who don't have that.
We have just introduced to all our students, and it's starting off with mine, in the capstone project, in my program, they pretty well have to develop a resume for themselves. And they have to do the research and what the target market is and all this other good stuff. And what we're asking for, and this tied in, we were talking about this at WASC yesterday. Our indirect measure is a reflective journal. And it's a very good way to have as an indirect measure. And what we're finding is the students make the excuses, the dog ate it, I've got a new computer, I don't have all those projects that I've done over the last 2 years. And what we've asked, and we've given it to them, and I gather the guy is coming here tomorrow, we have given them a portfolio, and it works extremely well with Blackboard. It integrates with Blackboard. So I will be grading through portfolio, which talks to Blackboard and comes back out again. And the student will keep that portfolio for life, because just as you said, a marketing agency, they're going to say, first thing, what have you done? And we're very excited about it because, as you said, more and more employers are now going to show me.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Just piggyback on Jorge's comment on portfolio. One thing that makes it really helpful both for the students and for the employers is that when they put an assignment, like a major assignment that they have done in their portfolio, they can tag that assignment with the skills of they learned. So, for example, if they develop a marketing strategy, they can tag it with, the theoretical skills and also some general skills. So, and I think it is also important in terms of, when you look at the student, it is important that they know what they learned. So because sometimes they are not aware of what they have learned throughout the curriculum. So by this tagging or by this reminder of, okay, in this course you learned this, or you're learning this through doing these assignments. So then when it comes to resume creation, they know what skills they have.
Right. Good. That's great. Isn't Peregrine doing some mapping thing with skills and competencies and all? Didn't I hear you talk about that?
Yeah, kind of, sort of. I've been mentioning a bit about our value skills, which is the soft skill assessment service. We've built into client admin a learning outcomes mapping and reporting utility, which is to go through, identify your learning outcomes and goals and objectives that all the way up at the institutional level, all the way down to the course level, and then map those to the data and the instrument and the data so you can report it a little bit quicker, say for your IACBE assurance report. And so we built, in fact, actually that was the first report we built, was the IACBE report. We just took and structured it that way so it makes it a little bit faster for you. But that's the mapping you're referring to, where you're mapping so what it amounts to is when you run the report, you can run it at any level. Of course, for IACBE, you're running at the program level. But for your institutional learning outcomes, you can fold in, if you're using our gen ed service plus your business and accounting and over here CJ or something, you can pull that data together for a comprehensive institutional report for your institutional accreditor. But that's built into client admin. Yep.
Great. Dr. O?
I think the portfolio idea is a very good idea because I think it does more than just them collecting artifacts. It helps to provide some continuity and reinforcement in their learning. For us, it's very important because we get pharmacy students, they come, they take classes now, then they go into pharmacy for 1 year, they come back, then they go again back to pharmacy, then they come back. So the portfolio allows us to give them a continuity. You know, they are working on a business plan, it's continuous, and we have that artifact going with them. So I think it's a strong tool to use because it also helps them, like you say, reinforce what they know. So when they go on interview, it's easy for them to say, yes, I've done this because the artifacts has helped them to reinforce it over and over again. One karate instructor used to tell me, your muscle, memorize it. You don't have to think about it, it just comes out.
Yeah, I mean, students forget what they didn't know when they started the program. And I've had students come up to me, and you give them the end of program survey, and it asks them to self-rate on how much they learned about accounting or finance or economics. And they'll say, well, I didn't learn anything. They'll put themselves at a 1 or a 2 on a scale of 5. And then when I get a chance to talk to them and say, okay, how much did you know about accounting when you came into the program? Well, nothing. That's why I came to college. Okay, so do you know what a financial statement is now? Yes. Do you know what a journal entry is? Even if you're not good at writing them, do you know debits and credits, journal entries? Do you know what depreciation means? Yes. Well, do you know more about accounting now than you did when you started? Oh, yeah, I do. Portfolios can help students to remember how much they know. And I think what Susan said about her indirect measure, I think reflecting on that portfolio, that's what makes it experiential learning. It's that reflection on what you've learned and how you've learned it and how it's changed you that can make even a classroom assignment experiential learning. All experiential learning, it isn't all out in the workplace. Experiential learning can occur in the classroom, it can occur on the job, it can occur in lots of places. But it's that reflection. They have to know they've learned something or they haven't really learned it, if you don't know that you learned it, which I guess is kind of circular, but. So as I was reading this one article, it was really interesting because the guy went around to a lot of schools in Wisconsin. And they mainly looked at a lot of medical and biotechnical kinds of programs. So lots of what he wrote about talked about what students learned in the laboratory. And employers wanted students to have hands-on experience in the laboratory, using the equipment and doing the experiments, and doing all the things that they were going to do when they got on the job. So when I started thinking about it, I said, well, in business, it's not all that different. We want to take them from lecture to laboratory. And laboratory can be simulations, it can be work experience, it can be the captain of the football team. There's lots of laboratories that our business students can practice and demonstrate their business skills. In doing all this, this is where we can separate declarative knowledge, knowing about something, from procedural knowledge, actually knowing how to do it. And employers want both. They want students to have the basic knowledge, but you saw technical knowledge was about 10th. They want them to be able to do something with it, which is why when we talk to you about writing your intended student learning outcomes, they need to be written for a program at the application level or above. It's assumed that they have all that foundational knowledge. And it's very important for you to know what foundational knowledge they have and they don't have so that you can improve your program. Because that's what the assessment is about. It's how to help you continuously improve your program. But employers, in most cases, don't care about that level of detail. It's great that you can define what goes into an income statement and a balance sheet, but can you take this stack of journal entries or this stack of receipts and create an income statement and a balance sheet? That's the piece they want to know. For you to improve your programs, you need to know whether they have that basic knowledge. Key for you to be able to trace back where you need to go to fix things. So just kind of thinking about resume-worthy experiences both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. To go on a resume, I mean, you have to be honest about it, but I don't think it has to be something done outside the classroom. I think you can create activities, you can create competitions in the classroom that students can then document on a resume, especially if they don't have anything else to put on it. If their whole experience is working in fast food, that's great, and there's a lot they can show from that. But if you can provide them experiences that are more related to their career and where they want to get, I think that's very valuable. There's a virtually unlimited number of things outside the classroom that they can do. And I think, well, someplace I have a slide on that. But outside the classroom, it can be internships. Paid internships rate higher with potential employers than unpaid, but they're both work experience. They can both go on the resume. They can do study abroad. They can shadow people. They can do the IACBE case study competition. If you win that, that's something that can and should go on a resume, because the way our competition works is they are looking at a real problem from a real company and presenting it in front of business people, faculty, and a representative from the company. I don't think any of the schools here are participating in the virtual case study competition, which occurs, I think it opens up in about a week or so. But they actually have a company from Europe that makes a system so that somebody who is not able to use their hands or even their mouth to control a wheelchair can use where they look to control a wheelchair. It's already been rolled out in Europe, and they want to roll it out in the States. So the students are looking at that whole process and how could that company roll it out? They'll get a kickoff. Each team will get, I think it's not a lot, it's like 15 minutes with a company representative to ask questions. And then at least one company representative will be on the judging team to look at students, along with other industry people. And we have one representative from IACBE who will be representing us. So that is a resume-worthy experience, even if you just compete in it. The fact that they had the opportunity to do that and present it in front of the company, which is not a lie, is something great. So there's lots of opportunities, and we're trying to help you to provide those kinds of opportunities and all the other ways that you can. So we've already looked at these. I mean, you need to begin this whole process, what kinds of experiences you provide, by looking at what employers are really looking for, and ensure that those experiences also speak to these items. There's the list. So examples of things that students can do that could be resume-worthy experiences. And this works for non-traditional adult learners, for traditional students. A lot of our non-traditional adult students have never had a job in business. It's been in some other service industry, so they may be 35 or 40 years old and have no experience in the field they want to go into. So how can you help them accomplish that, both inside and outside the classroom? This again looks at the experiential learning model. And in doing some more reading, it's not just the process of creating knowledge, but it requires reflection. If you don't know you've learned it, you haven't learned it. You have to know that it's changed you for it to really have that kind of deep meaning. So what outcomes or competencies do students need to demonstrate in their experiential learning? Any of these. There's no specific right or wrong. They're all important. Depends on what opportunities the student has to demonstrate them, whether they're doing it in an internship. They're probably going to be demonstrating higher level ones. But we saw that the NACE competencies are oftentimes down lower in the curriculum, so they can demonstrate those in a variety of ways. What outcomes or competencies do you use? You don't have to adopt the NACE competencies. You don't have to pull things out of a diagram. Use what you have. Use your own program level intended student learning outcomes, because they are mapped to the key learning outcomes. And you know that if you've gone through the accreditation process, you have to show in that when you look at curriculum that you are covering the business technical knowledge areas. We don't at this point require you to have student assessment data for majors or concentrations. There are other ways to demonstrate high quality in those. It can be things like employment, licensure pass rates. It can be graduation rates, acceptance into graduate programs, promotions on the job. There's a list of those that you can do. So you don't necessarily, in the model I showed, I took it down to, okay, in business, this is accounting. You don't have to go to that level with what you're doing with your intended student learning outcomes. You still can with your curriculum. Just because you don't have to report it to us doesn't mean you shouldn't still be doing it. We say this is what you have to report to us as part of your business accreditation. But looking at what students are going to get for every one of your majors or concentrations and running that past industry experts to see if that's what they're really looking for helps to increase that potential for employability. I just, as I was looking at this, looked at a competency, teamwork. We looked at this one earlier. Those are the things that, in my look at it, could make up teamwork. And I thought, okay, I'm going to just create a simple rubric for how to measure that. So that rubric measures teamwork. It sounds like this is a lot what you have done. So depending on whether you have this, you want to do it yourself, you want to explore what somebody else has done. But it really wasn't hard. And we said you could even take those NACE competencies and pull apart the pieces. but I just created a basic rubric when NACE had students and employers self-assess, and we saw that gap between where employers saw proficiency and students. That is the scale that they used. They didn't use a 0. I always like a not demonstrated because sometimes it's not. I don't know what kind of definition they gave. They may have just said the words, but basic awareness, novice, intermediate, proficient, and accomplished. So I thought, interesting scale. I'm a fan of shorter scales, like 3 items, but I can see where there's value in this one. Yes?
Yeah, Phyllis, we've been having some issues with this rubric for teamwork with my faculty because one is we assess these ones based on the individual level. However, we also need to grade the end product, like the assessment for the group project. Do they achieve the goal that we were looking for? Then the problem that we're having is like 2 rubrics, one for the individual assessment of the team members, and the second one for the group project itself. Then we don't know how to differentiate those 2 or how to do it.
So you measure each student and how well they perform on the team, and then you look at the overall project that the team submitted and you assess that.
Yeah, 2 separate.
Yeah, they're different. For IACBE purposes, even with something like that, with all of your intended student learning outcomes, you have to have results by individual. So even if you use a group project, you have to have some way to determine if each individual student achieved the outcomes. So that's individual projects make that piece easier, but we have schools that use group projects and have individual deliverables throughout the course of the project so they can look at individual students. But when you assess the overall project, does every student in the group get the same grade?
Yeah, but they should.
Well, if it's a group project, you have to live or die by what the group gets. So, I mean, that's a decision that you and your faculty have to make. Are you going to say everybody gets the same grade and that's part of being in the group, and if this person didn't work, then you pick up the slack, because that is real world. That's what happens in the real world. But, you know, then you have the group that's all the A students, and you have the group that's all the barely get by students, because nobody else wants them. So I love group work. It teaches a lot of good skills, but it's really hard to assess student learning with group work because you never know who did it. Yeah, Jim?
One of the ways we dealt with that once upon a time in the dark, dark past with a school that cannot be named, we allowed the group to fire people.
Oh, yeah, I taught for that
Yeah.
school, too.
Yeah, yeah. And that helped solve the social loafer, we called them, who decided that the group was going to kind of pull them along. And you have to be careful, though. I approached, I had a group of Marines that were in my class, about 25 of them. And I said, you know, if you're in a group and you got a problem within your group, handle it. And then all of a sudden I realized these guys were trained to kill people.
I was going to say, are they special forces?
And so I had to back off. I said, now, you know, professionally, you know, let's deal with this. But it really helped with the whole issue that we're talking about with groups. And obviously a bunch of you have had that too. So
I taught for that school, and I came into a classroom one time, and the rest of the students told me that this one student was what they called a cohort jumper. And she would stay in the group until nobody in the class would have her in their group, and then she would sit out for 4 weeks and come back and be in another cohort and stay in that cohort until everybody knew her game. They said she must have had 10, 15 grandparents.
Yeah, we had actually rotate learning centers, so they.
Oh, well, that's.
Basically have a problem with this learning center, and then they see, you see them in another one. Because.
In Colorado Springs, there was only one at the
We
time,
had a
so
bunch
she
of them in San
couldn't.
Diego, so they kind of floated around.
Yeah, Olin.
Yeah, what we've done pretty similar to this. So we have one of the items in the test bank is teamwork, and then we have a definition looks pretty similar to what you have up there. How many different ways can you?
I mean,
you
teamwork's
define
teamwork.
Teamwork's teamwork. What we've done though, and then you have items down there. Come to team meetings, prepared and on time. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items under the category of teamwork. We've split each one of those out into a separate rubric that you could fold under that. And then I agree, we don't call it not demonstrated. What we say is not observed, because that, if they didn't do it, that could be a 1 if they didn't demonstrate it. And then what we've done, we do it on a 5-point scale as well. But one of the big debates we had about a year ago, and the initial scale actually looked pretty close to this, and then we changed it, is because one of the challenges with that specific scale, if you think about it, what's the goal of this scale? The tendency is you're going to mark everybody a 4 or 5, right? Because you're going to want to go high. So we changed 3 is meets expectations. This is good. And then we have very good, we don't use that term, but and then exceptional, and then going the other way, the same thing. So you could, if you do have enough evaluators, you give them a range here. And then for each one of those blank squares up there, we have a statement of what a 3 means, a behavior of what a 3 means, and a scale for what a 3 means. So there's 3 elements to every one of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the whole intent of this is to improve reliability. So, and reduce subjectivity is what we're trying to do. Get as close to objective. You'll never get 100%, but try to move it in that way. So this is displayed for the assessors or the evaluators to go through like this, is you give some very specific, so that ideally if the person really is a 3 and you got 5 people, that they all rate a 3, because it's very clear. That's what we're trying to target. But it's been interesting. Like I said, it took us quite a while to develop all these, but it's a very fascinating kind of way to look at it.
It's always such a challenge to write that description in a descriptive rubric and what it really means and looks like. And just in looking at this one, I just looked at it, and you can see if the student demonstrates it this % of the time, then that's this level of performance, which for the teamwork one, where it comes to meetings on time and those kinds of things, you can probably quantify like that. Others, not so simple, but just one way of kind of looking at it, with the end one being accomplished, is able to mentor somebody else in the behavior. That to me is like the ultimate. You can do it, and you can help somebody else do it. But again, that's leadership. Yeah, that's my definition. And that's why I didn't put what the percentages were here, because I don't want anybody to come back and say, well, I saw a rubric you did, and you said it had to be 25 to 40% of the time they do it to get this rating. That piece is all up to you. Yeah.
So I was just going to share, in INF 220, we have a team assignment, and we do have the students to provide feedback on members in their team. Mm-hmm. The team does receive a grade. However, everyone knows that the instructor may lower your grade based on the feedback.
Okay.
And that's how we do it.
Mm-hmm. The only thing, not to quibble, but now I'll put my employer hat on, not my academic hat. When I read accomplished, demonstrates the concept or behavior the majority of the time, and I agree with the second part where you've got that's really the above and beyond, but demonstrates the concept or behavior the majority of the time, to me, that is the expectation. That's a 3. Mm-hmm. That as an employer, I expect that of all my team members, that you are on time and you show up all the time. That is a 3. To be a 4 is there's additional prep, and to be a 5 is I'm encouraging others. That to me is a 5. But as an employer, I showed up 5 out of 10 times. No, that's failing, guys. That's not a 3. That's a failure. So that when we were writing our rubrics, we looked at we used HR people to really think of this through. And then we had academians proof it, but we started first with the HR perspective, or supervisors and leaders and managers, because what is a 3 to me is you are on time all the time. That's a 3.
The minimum, yeah.
That's the minimum requirement is a 3. Meets expectations.
That's interesting too. If you have a descriptive rubric where you describe what the behavior levels look like for each of your outcomes, have you ever shared that description with your advisory committee or employers? I mean, I've never told the school to do that. So that's something it's very interesting, because I talk to schools a lot about advisory committees and the value. But sharing the description of what the behavior is with business could substantially change how you define it. And you can define it any way you want, but if it's not the way business wants, then you're going to say they met it, and they're going to get out in the workplace and get fired. Right. So
does that go back to your opening slide where there's a delta between self-perception and what employers are seeing?
Yeah.
And this could be leading to that false assumption. Hey, I got a 5 on punctuality because I was there most of the time. No, that to me, guys, that's a 3, not a 5.
Yeah. Okay. That's a very interesting way to look at it, and something to think about with your rubrics, that maybe you do need to share them with business. That as academics, what we think has met that requirement is not what somebody's hiring them for. So again, in IACBE, you have to, once you've decided if they have achieved whatever level where they are, then some % of students achieve a meets or higher, a 3 or higher, a 4 or higher, whatever you want to do for each of the outcomes or competencies. Don't say all students, because there's always one or more, but say a percentage that would be acceptable. We don't tell you what that is. I can tell you we had one school say like 40 or 50% of students would achieve it, and the commissioner said, no, try again.
The other thing we did, and we designed it so you guys can readily do just this, set your targets accordingly, is we also built eValue skills as an inbound, outbound, the capability to do inbound, outbound. Now, undergraduate 4-year, I don't highly recommend that. What 18-year-old's going to get a competent unless they mom and dad do it for them or something. But so you may an undergraduate, traditional undergraduate, probably mostly be outbound, where you have an internship supervisor and a professor or 2 or somebody else. Graduate, non-traditional students, this works really well. This is what we're piloting right now with the school. So you have a baseline, what happened at the start of the academic program, and then you administer the same instrumentation so you can measure change. And maybe its change becomes your performance target. Did you really affect change in teamwork or leadership or whatever that may look like? And then the other way of looking, we looked at targets. It's not just simply a percent above or below a target, is look at your group average and what's the deviation from average is also another way to look at your performance targets. So we built in a system where you can set plus or minus, I'm not going to say significant because that implies it's statistical, but just simply a deviation between the group average, when you got 30 students or whatever, what's the deviation, who are your highs and who are your lows, what's your band, and that could be a way of targeting as well, as opposed to necessarily just saying, hey, 20% failed or something. Is failed to what? You know, that's always the trick part.
Yeah, our first step in this is going from, we had a lot of schools would say, students score an average of something, and that average hides so much. So we wanted to get them to say, okay, what percentage of them will you be comfortable with if this percentage meets or exceeds your requirement? Being able to do more statistical analysis would be great, but a lot of our schools, this is all they have time for. This is as far as they can go. Now, if something else does that for them, yeah, if something else does more of that, then that's a great way to look at it. But just getting a lot of schools past using the average was a big step, because that was easy. You know, all the students in this class scored an average of 3.4 on this one and 4.2, but 80% of them may not have achieved it. So
I think the biggest drawback of that average, which I point out to people, is that when you have an average, you can have an outlier that draws that. Oh, sorry. When you have an average, you can have an outlier, and the outlier would distort the message of the average. But if you say this percent scored, then the outlier is not as significant, especially if you have a small class. So it benefits the institution anyway.
it does. It gives you, I mean, if half the students get a 1 and half get a 5, your average is 3, but half the students didn't achieve the goal. But you still, if 3 is your goal, you don't see that part. And if the goal of all this, outcomes assessment is not for the students. The results you get from outcomes assessment are for you as an institution, are for your faculty to be able to use that to improve your program. Students get grades. That's what matters to them. What grade goes on the transcript? Do they earn the degree? Not whether you think they achieved a particular learning outcome or competency. That may change. Achievement of those competencies may become more important, but right now, the use for the outcomes assessment results that we ask you to collect are for you to be able to look back and improve your programs. And if you used an average and saw it was a 3, that you met it, then there's nothing to change. You achieved what your goal was. But if you see that 50% of your students did not achieve it, I would hope that you would want to go back and fix your program. Knowing more about what the population looks like, other than 80% got a 3 or higher, could drive you even further into which ones you really need to look at. And, you know, then attributes, I mean, there's a ton of ways to go that way. But as a starting point, the goal is to improve your curriculum and your student learning, their achievement of those outcomes. So how do you do that? And employment is one of those student achievement outcomes that you can report on, which CHIA requires us to have you report. So anything you can do to help students be more employable is a good thing. So some of the goals that you might have after this could be to look at your ISLOs and see how well they really do align with career readiness factors. Whether you use the NACE factors, industry factors, wherever you find them, are your ISLOs really aligned? Since I'm a visual learner, having a model to depict the program really helps me get my arms around it. So think about whether you can have some kind of visual model that shows what your program is. Hopefully we're going to learn more about what Ashford's is with some of their presentations tomorrow, but they have one. If you don't, here's one option. Talk to them, search it online. Make sure that you work with external constituents to validate the model. You put this model together and identify what you think students need to know. Make sure that it's not academia saying this is what we think students should know. Make sure that it's informed by accountants and marketing people and business owners and entrepreneurs and all of those kinds of people. Utilize experiential learning concepts. We went over those. Make sure that you include reflection as part of the program so that when students get to interviews, they know what they know. They realize that they have created new knowledge for themselves, because we can't create it for them, and they've internalized it. Try to build resume-worthy experience into the program, whether it's study abroad, internships, student government opportunities, whatever it is that you can think of. Try to give students an opportunity to get something to put on their resume besides, I earned a BBA in accounting with a 3.5 GPA. Something more than that. Make sure you're measuring achievement of all the ISLOs and competencies. You need to know where students are. And then measure student achievement. Not just student learning, which are ISLOs and competencies, but measure student achievement. Things like graduation rates, job advancement. I'm sure a lot of you either have or are getting ready to submit your WebPath notification form, which is due by November 1st. It's my last commercial. It's due November 1st. You have to identify one of the items listed on the form. Those are some of them for each of your programs, and provide information on that. It's CHIA required. We do not tell you which ones. We give you a list of choices. We don't tell you how you have to calculate them. Part of the form gives you a place to tell us how you calculate persistence or graduation rates or job advancement or whatever you use. But make sure that you're not only looking at student learning, which you have to report with your interim quality assurance report, and again with your self-study twice during your 7-year cycle. The student achievement you have to post every year, and you have to submit the WebPath notification to us week from tomorrow, maybe? Week from tomorrow, it's due. So I know we're a couple minutes over, but I just wanted to ask each person to just quickly let me know one thing that was valuable to you out of this, because it will help me guide where I go when I do this again and what we do with this. So since I started with Jorge before, I'm going to start with Olin.
My two takeaways are, one, the process. For me, it in some ways helps validate what we're doing with the value skills. And then my other thing, and I got bolded here that I need to write Christina about, is pull up the NACE competencies and then go ahead and add that map into our database, test bank, so that, I don't want to call it test bank, but we call it that anyway. And so of the 300, we can go pull those out, and then we'll just directly map those to those. And that way it'll be easier for you guys if you want to say, hey, I want to do the NACE a 360. It's already mapped and built for you. It's just an easier way to do it.
Great.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the pyramid that you had of the structure of how you look at a program was a great reminder of the process. And then also the data that you gave us at the very beginning, where the gaps are between what the marketplace is telling us and what students think. So both of those were really helpful. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. I thought it was all great. It really was. I couldn't pick out one thing that was better than something else. I would agree with what Jim just said and what Olin said. I thought it was a great presentation, and you covered some very valuable information. Thank you.
Good.
I agree.
Now, I tell students all the time, you cannot do that. You have to find something else that was useful.
But I have some ideas that I'm taking away from this. So I really liked the model that was presented, and it helped me to think about how I could create the student academic plan differently. And I've never really asked students in the very beginning to commit to experiences. And I think at the very beginning, it would be helpful to have students have an idea of what their academic requirements are, but to also build in some sort of like student experience passport. So I want them to identify which experiences they're interested in pursuing. So that way when we're advising them, we could also remind them of when they're going to have these experiences along the way. And then along with that, it's also building in the credentialing part. So it's very easy for our accounting students because the pathway usually is towards a CPA. So if we want our students to be attractive in the job market or prepare for graduate programs, also identify which credentials they're hoping to pursue so we can build that in. And also, maybe looking to create a pool of mentors and or coaches to help them through that pathway. So you have your faculty advisor, but I also think you need someone from industry to help you along that way. So, those are just some things that I got excited about today.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
Thank you.
Dr. Rose.
Yeah, so I think, but one of the things that came to my mind was my first job as an engineer in, I think, 1980. I was in New Jersey, so when I got there, the hired me, the employer told me, forget everything you know. We don't need it. We're going to teach you what, but it just reminds me that employers have a whole different idea, and that has never changed at all. But one thing that I think your presentation would do for us, especially because we bring in guest speakers into the classroom. Some of them are dentists, some of them are pharmacists, and they tell us what they're looking for. We have used it to provide information to the students, but we need to find a way to build it into what we teach so that we are also reinforcing what the students are hearing themselves. And the students sometimes do tell us that what they're looking for also, because they hear pharmacists tell them what they're looking for, or dental tell them. So having a framework to put it together and to start driving it into the curriculum and mapping it, I think will be a great asset to us.
Okay, great.
The slide that was showing the gaps between the graduate's understanding and the employer was very, very interesting for me. And it reminds me how important it is that we emphasize the students understand what they're learning throughout the program. One of the great ways was the tagging in the portfolio, but I think they need more help in understanding of what they are learning throughout this journey. And also this model is very interesting, and I just can't wait to go home and look it up and see how I can map it to my own research that I was doing with the industry curriculum alignments.
Great, great.
Well, definitely the model, because like I said, that's what we used as we did our mapping. So it was wonderful seeing the confirmation where you're doing it as well and identifying it on the IACBE level as well. So also, even with the model, how you walk through the sections of it was really, really great. Really good. Continue to do that. And also during our session, you allowed time for us to really talk about what employers want versus what we're doing. And you really allowed that free flow conversation to go. I think is very, very important to this workshop because that helps to identify where those gaps are, or even helps to identify what some institutions may be doing that's more on target than what others are doing. But you allowed that open conversation. Even when Olin said, I want you to do it, it was wonderful. Allow that conversation to flow. That's how we learn. That's how we grow.
Well, I think I should do half the work and you should do half the work. So I think we accomplished that.
From the general perspective, I think the MOL is going to give us, at least for our school framework, to build a database, because we don't know or we don't have any numbers right now. Then if we have the framework, it's going to help us to do that. Then I think it's going to be very useful for us because we don't have anything right now. Then thank you very much for that one. And from the particular perspective, the competencies definitions. We are working on the critical thinking assessment right now, and it's going to help us a lot.
Good.
And the second one, the case study competition. I'm leading the capstone class right now, and I think I'm just gonna dig into it. And
Good.
I think it's gonna be very good. Thank you.
Great.
Great job, Phyllis. Thank you very much. I think the beginning when you highlighted the fact that employers are one of our stakeholders. A lot of times, as academics, we focus so much on students, and I know sometimes employers, we know they're stakeholders, but they're an afterthought. So showing that data of them self-reporting, I think was helpful. And we don't have to wait till NACE comes out with their next survey. That's something that that we can do ourselves. The other thing that I thought was great was how you define skills that are habits of mind, right? So a lot of times as we're developing programs and courses, we think that those habits can be done in one learning activity. So a lot of times that's not possible. So it's a matter of scaffolding and making sure that we're reinforcing throughout the program. But great job, Phyllis. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody. I brought this slide up because as everybody was talking, I
Phyllis,
started.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to see if you wanted to see if our online individual wanted to contribute. A virtual?
Cecilia said thank you, and she signed off.
Did she? Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, she's a time zone, two time zones later than us. So, but with this, it would be interesting if you developed this for a particular program and then filled it in as students achieve those various competencies. So they fill it in from the bottom up as they move through the program. So instead of like on a transcript, they've said at some point schools may go to a competency-based transcript where you list the competencies and how they demonstrated them. And the key, at least for us, is it's either met or not met. Whatever your target is, they either meet it or they don't meet it. But if there was a way to recreate this, and then as they achieve each one of those items, it's kind of like filling the tank till they get to the end, might be an interesting depiction for students to track their own progress of achieving the goal of getting through the program, even up through some of the top occupational, and they just fill it up, and in a competency-based program, when they get to the end, they get their diploma.
That would be license for offline. That would be how you can structure.
Are you recording it?
That's where you could structure the e-portfolio. This becomes the subfolders within the e-portfolio.
Yeah.
And you already built the subfolders for them, and then they see where to put the signature assignments or whatever should be mapped to that. And then that truly would be, that would be much more powerful than your transcript in all practical purposes as an employer. Oh yeah, I see where you got interpersonal skills and where you got taught in integrity, and oh, by the way, you understand debits and credits, and I can see it very visually that way. If that was the e-portfolio structure, that's a great idea.
I think it would be interesting to watch it.
That truly would be the competency.
For a student to watch it fill up as they move through the degree, supported by resume-worthy experiences and documented student learning. And once you fill it up, in theory, you're at the end of your program and graduating, but if it became a competency-based program, and they're out there, and they're getting federal funding for them, so, once you fill up the pyramid, you're done.
Phyllis,
Yeah, use the microphone because they're still recording, if you will.
So just really quick, so does this exist, the e-portfolio? Okay.
You guys use
yes.
portfolio.
Yeah.
There are companies that provide portfolios.
Right, but we're hunting for one that speaks to our needs, because what we're describing here is what employers are looking for. It's what graduate programs are looking for. It's, so I'm just interested in finding out what programs are out there.
So I think a fantastic goal is to target is if we can have students from when they step into the program speaking competencies, if we can have all student-facing groups who are bringing in potential students speaking to these are the competencies that you will learn in the degree program, as well as faculty and everyone who's involved. That's where we want. That's where we want to be.
It is, and one of my big jobs in the next whatever amount of time, I think is going to be to work with the Board of Commissioners to change it from intended student learning outcomes to student competencies. I think just the change in wording, I don't know that it will substantially change what we require, because I think we're already basing it on competencies with our key learning outcomes and our business technical knowledge, but I think the language that we're using at IACBE is old.
It'll change the mindset.
It will give people a chance to focus on competency. It will allow you, hopefully the support at your institutions, to do more with competencies, because my business accreditor makes me do that. I love it. We don't mind being the bad guy. You can always tell your administration it's our fault.
But it's what employers expect.
It's what employers expect. It's those competencies, and we've got to get on using the same language, because a lot of the kind of out there educational organizations, not just universities, are all talking about competencies, and that's what employers hire for.